In 1997, a bank in Sao Paulo, Brazil, discovered that nearly half its entire capital, $242 million, was sitting in an account in the Cayman Islands, completely unaccounted for. The money had been sent, piece by piece, over 3 years to fund the construction of a new international airport in Abuja, Nigeria. There was just one problem. No airport was ever built. No airport was ever planned. The entire project, the government backing, the officials, even the man who pitched it, never existed. By the time anyone realized what had happened, the bank that fell for it no longer existed either. This is the story of Emmanuel Nwude and how one man convinced a respected international banker to hand over $250 million for a building that was never more than a fax and a business card. To understand how this happened, you need to understand who Emmanuel Nwude actually was. Because this wasn't an outsider's con, it was an insider's. Nwude had worked as a director at Union Bank of Nigeria, one of the country's oldest and most established financial institutions. That job didn't just give him a salary, it gave him something far more valuable: fluency. He knew exactly how international bankers spoke to each other, what kind of documents carried weight, and what a real opportunity was supposed to sound like. Most fraud depends on a victim's ignorance. This one depended on the opposite, on a victim's expertise. In March 1995, a fax arrived at the office of Nelson Sakaguchi, a director at Banco Noroeste in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It came from someone identifying himself as Tafida Williams, supposedly a senior official at Nigeria's Ministry of Aviation. The message was simple. Nigeria's government was seeking international investors to fund a new airport in its capital city, Abuja, a genuinely fast-growing city at the time, having only recently replaced Lagos as Nigeria's capital. It was, on its face, a plausible opportunity. New capital cities need new infrastructure. New infrastructure needs international financing. Sakaguchi had no obvious reason to assume the fax was anything other than what it claimed to be. He responded, and the trap, patient and carefully built, began to close. Sakaguchi was invited to London to meet with officials from Nigeria's central bank. When he landed at Heathrow, a private car was waiting for him, arranged by the very people orchestrating the fraud, designed to make the entire operation feel undeniably legitimate before a single word was spoken. At the hotel, he was introduced to a heavy-set man who presented a business card identifying himself as Paul Agwuma, the actual, real governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria at the time. The man was not Paul Agwuma. It was Emmanuel Nwude, wearing another man's name and reputation like a coat. Beside him sat two accomplices, Christian and Amaka Anajemba, posing as another senior central bank official and his wife. Sakaguchi shook their hands. He believed every word. The proposal was straightforward. Banco Noroeste would help finance the airport's construction. In exchange, Sakaguchi personally would receive a commission, reported at somewhere between $10 and $13 million, for arranging the deal. That number did more work than any forged document could have. It gave Sakaguchi a personal, direct incentive not to look too closely at what he was agreeing to. Between 1995 and 1998, Sakaguchi authorized payment after payment, $191 million in cash, with the remainder of the total $242 million accruing as promised interest. He never requested construction plans. He never verified government backing. He never asked to see the airport itself, even as a drawing. In return, he received progress reports. All of them, like everything else in this story, were fabricated. While the money flowed in, Nwude did something almost brazen in its confidence. He used a portion of the stolen funds to purchase shares in Union Bank of Nigeria, the very institution where he'd once worked, eventually becoming its largest individual shareholder. It wasn't just wealth, it was camouflage. A man who owns a controlling stake in a major bank doesn't look like a fraudster. He He looks like exactly what he was pretending to be all along: a legitimate, powerful player in Nigerian finance. The stolen funds were spread across more than 300 bank accounts worldwide, deliberately fractured to avoid drawing attention to any single transaction. For 3 years, the system worked exactly as designed. Nobody asked the one question that would have ended it instantly. Does this airport actually exist? In 1997, Spanish banking giant Santander moved to acquire Banco Noroeste. As part of the acquisition, Santander's auditors did what Sakaguchi never had. They checked the numbers. They found that nearly 40% of Banco Noroeste's entire capital, the same $242 million, was sitting untouched in an account in the Cayman Islands. Nobody at the bank could explain why. The truth surfaced quickly once someone finally looked. There was no airport project. There was no government authorization. Nelson Sakaguchi, the man responsible for one of Brazil's most respected financial institutions, had personally authorized the single largest theft in the bank's history, chasing a commission on a deal that was never real to begin with. To save the sale to Santander, Banco Noroeste's owners paid the missing $242 million out of their own pockets. It wasn't enough. The bank collapsed entirely in 2001. What followed was a genuinely international manhunt. Investigators in Brazil, Britain, Nigeria, Switzerland, and the United States working to trace money spread across hundreds of accounts on multiple continents. The first real breakthrough came in Geneva, when investigators froze a single account that had received $5 million from the fraud. That account's transaction history led them, thread by thread, to dozens of others, and eventually to the name Emmanuel Nwude. But identifying Nwude and prosecuting him were two very different problems. Nigeria, at the time, had no dedicated agency built to handle financial crimes of this scale. It would take the creation of an entirely new institution, the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, established in 2002 specifically in response to cases like this one, before Nwude could be formally charged. Nwude and his accomplices eventually faced 86 counts of fraud and attempted bribery. In 2005, after years of legal delays, including one trial collapsing entirely when a judge claimed he lacked jurisdiction to hear it, Nwude pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison and ordered to repay what he had stolen. He served less than 2 years of that sentence before his release in 2006. He later recovered an estimated $52 million in assets he claimed to have acquired legitimately, separate from the fraud. The airport that started it all was never built. Abuja's actual international airport had been under construction through entirely legitimate means, financed through entirely different channels the whole time. It's tempting to tell this story as a tale of one brilliant con man. But the more uncomfortable truth is that Nwude's plan wasn't especially sophisticated. A fax, a business card, a private car from the airport. What made it work wasn't genius. It was Sakaguchi's own unwillingness to ask a single verifying question, because a personal commission worth millions gave him every reason not to. Every fraud in this genre follows the same quiet arithmetic. The bigger the reward on offer, the less anyone wants to check if it's real. Nwude understood that better than any banker in the room. He didn't need to be a genius. He just needed Sakaguchi to want the story to be true. The question this story leaves behind isn't really about Nwude at all. It's about how many of us, offered the same commission, would have asked to see the blueprints first. This has been The Money Trail.